Jacksonville. The child was born but couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
From WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network, the week that was on the 10th of November 2018. And it was an interesting week. It was election week for the midterm elections, all-important midterm elections. We had basically two factors going on, actually three, gubernatorial races, and also we had House races and Senate races. We have our model, and we partner with Cranston Analytics, the Ouija board model, as opposed to the crystal ball that is at the University of Virginia. And of course, when we mention that name, we remember Heber Heyer. An interesting races in that the performance was more than expected. They needed a magic number of 23. It's 30 plus now going on here. And a lot of the districts that were won were traditionally red districts, which is a different situation entirely. And also districts that the Hillary Clinton had carried that is attuned to demographics and other things, and we'll have more about that later as we evaluate the voting patterns and in terms of turnout, etc. Early in the week we talked about, or actually last week, we talked about projections as far as numbers of registered voters and elsewhere from the Voter Project. We looked at that particular situation. Let me see if I can zip it up here. We still have it up. Yeah, this is the... actually, this is a little different here. The new election survey, how people vote. And this is called the NORC evaluation. It's the American Evaluation the American Evaluation Association, and that took place in Cleveland. Actually, this is not what we are wanting here, but these methods are being used were used by the Wall Street Journal, the AP, and of all things, Fox News. Now, newsrooms are rethinking midterm coverage. To meet the challenges of midterm, news outlets are taking a more collaborative approach, changing how they report on polls and covering the voting patterns itself as well as the results. When reporting on the 2008 elections in July, a reporter here, Masha Khalif, went to Georgia to talk to African American voters. Knowing she had been interviewing Republicans a few days before, they wanted to know why they were still on board with DJ Trump. Khalif said, it makes me think how unfamiliar Americans are with one another. And he won't spend a lot of time on that. But diversity is one issue the media outlets are grasping with as the midterm elections approach. All, of course, 335 House seats were up. Smaller races, of course, are difficult to cover. For many local newspapers already spread very thin by redundancies and what have you. The Pew Center for Research survey taken in March of 2017, 89% of Democrats agree that criticism from news organizations keeps political leaders from doing things that they shouldn't. Only 42% of Republicans share that view. A totally different situation. Khalif, she grew up in a small town in Indiana, a Republican state. She's, of course, a Muslim and a woman of color. I grew up thinking if I were going out and asking people what motivated them, they will treat me with equal levels of respect, and what 2016 exposed me to, this was not always true. Kind of more of a Pollyannish view of the American people and where they are. But there is an attempt now to at least look at things from both ends in doing this reporting. According to census data, we'll call it big data, by Circle, that's a Tufts University initiative designed to provide authoritative research in civil engagement of young Americans. 81% of people under 30 didn't vote in 2014. Khalif and her colleagues wanted to tell their stories, so they went to the 1st District in Nevada. Many of these stories, and the youth turnout, incidentally, was much larger, and that was no doubt one of the things that went out there. To capture the opinions of non-voters is the one reason the Associated Press has launched AP VoterCast, an evolution of traditional exit polling. Well, many things have started out there. National exit polls have been a fixture since 1972. It was the first one was conducted by CBS News. In November of 2016, exit polls were paid for by a consortium of news organizations conducted by Emerson Research. In 2018, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN are still paying for the polls, but the AP, along with Fox News and other organizations, paid for a new survey coordinated by the NORC. That's an independent, nonpartisan research organization based at the University of Chicago. What this basically does is it breaks the back of some of the corporate media organizations, and this is the whole emphasis of what we are doing now. The takeaway is that progressives need to look at the whole political circumference totally different than they have in the past, in terms of not only the races, but the anatomy of the races, the side issues involved in the races, which is ideological. They need to understand what the political ideology is behind the DJ Trump administration. They have to go deeper, looking at what Bannon has written, these various conservative commentators. This is what we attempt to do here at WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network, is present many sides of the coin so the listener can evaluate that and also provide the listener with as many tools as we possibly can to do that. Now, the exit polls are basically out. The AP's VoterCast, we talked about that, and we'll be following this up, which represents voters in all 50 states. We're getting a more holistic approach. The Democratic Party, via primarily progressives, i.e. women, African Americans, and Latinos. We call African Americans the followers of O.J. Simpson. In many of these states, including Georgia, they interviewed 80,000 people with voters, 4 times more than the 19,000 conducted by Edison in 2014. Very similar to YouGov. The survey will combine interviews on Election Day with others conducted online and by phone on the 4 days before the election. So this is a much more complete way of doing it. There's no doubt about that. We have Uncle Carl. We'll just go to him now because he's on the lineup here. The Circle, the Center for Information and Research, that is at Tufts, I believe. Yeah. The U.S. Census released the data from 2014 and current population supplement. These are some things here, and we'll explore whether we'll pinch this or not, but things such as turnout, etc. This is at Tufts, the Jonathan Tesh College of Civic Life. Sorry about that. I guess it is civil also. So let's go to Uncle Carl. We usually have him here. He's writing in the Wall Street Journal as usual on the 8th of November. Both parties win and lose. The election outcome feels like the end of an elementary school soccer season. Everyone gets a ribbon. Everyone leaves with something to brag about. A very favorable electoral map allowed the Republicans to expand their lead in the Senate. Their numbers rise from 51 to a narrow 2-seat, 53 or 54, depending on Arizona and where the McSally there. Actually, Sinema, the candidate in Arizona, the last we looked, is up by 20,000 votes. We, using our secondary model, the slide rule model, project if this continues because of the votes are coming out of areas that are heavily Democratic, Maricopa County, for instance, that she will eventually win this race. For their part, the Democrats will control the House at print time. I won't say press time. The Democrats had 229 now. Their race compared with 206 for the Republicans, with 17 outcomes yet to be decided. Some of those have been decided as of this, but we won't quibber there. Still, both parties suffered disappointment. Many Democrats feel their party didn't perform as well as expected. Some of their let me see here. Some of their internalized their hair of Mr. Trump and assumed everybody shares it in their minds. For Boo Wade would be a tsunami by Election Day, weakening the catastrophic damage on the GOP, providing the way to a fine victory against its hated leaders in 2020. Well, that is too far ahead to look. Similarly, some Republicans entertained the delusion that a red wave would save them from the prospects of Nancy Pelosi in the Speaker's chair. They asked who doesn't want to make America great again, and who could possibly be sick of all this winning, and the answer about the other half of the country. For both parties, persuasion was out, and inflaming the base was in. Very little change. Red went redder, and blue went bluer. And purple, well, we generally become more blue. And that is a shift, and that shift has been going on. There are lessons to be learned. Stacey Abrams' defeat in Georgia, don't hold your breath there, Uncle Carl. She hadn't been defeated yet. Undermined the idea that Democrats can win the South while ignoring white moderates. Andrew Gillum lost in Florida. We use the term, incidentally. Europeans suggest an agenda fashioned for deep blue states isn't the right sell for purple ones. In Texas, Ted Line Cruz, nearly re-elected, indicates a self-centered ambition and personal unlikability can tax the patience of even a very conservative electorate. And in Scott Walker, Boss Walker, downfall in Wisconsin is unfortunate. It reminds that good guys get beat too. And boy, that's a long stretch. Some races remained unresolved as of this writing. Abrams is waging a let me see here. I don't have my glasses on here. A challenge to the outcome in the Peach State, that's Georgia, and mail-in ballots with dribble into election offices for days in Washington, Oregon, California, Maine have goofy ranked voting experiences in the 3 weeks. Mississippi will hold, of course, a special election there. No candidate got 50% on Tuesday night. Two Republicans had a combination of 58%. That would be 7% over. And both parties in this midterm with big problems to work out for the Democrats. The left-wing policies not only the cost for their winnable races, but also hard feelings amongst middle-class voters that today's Democratic Party of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Alexandria Ocasio isn't for them. Similar Republicans' complacency about defections amongst college-educated suburbanites, particularly women and independents. First in a decade, decisions not to vote Republican in the midterms could consign the GOP to a long period of political wilderness if it isn't careful. Democrats could put themselves in danger by acting rashly in the months ahead. Pelosi following the impeachment of of DJ Trump and Kavanaugh. They aren't interested in Kavanaugh. They'll take care of itself. Could cost the Democrats the House the next time around. And when former Representative Waxman, a ruthless, energetic, and feared oversight chairman, is in the late Bush years, wanted the new Democratic chair against starting too many investigations. Well, he was right about that. Still, the Trump administration must prepare itself for the coming wave of congressional oversights, and Republicans did the same thing there, and investigative efforts, and avoid choking over how the Democrats will overdo it. The White House will soon recognize that the firing of Jeff Sessions only created massive headaches on Capitol Hill and has a confirmation battle that will set ugly long for 2019. Well, there are other problems there also. Uncle Carl has overlooked here. The times are changing and the demographics are changing. In Texas, it was a 3% race. Beto O'Rourke ran much better than Hillary Clinton. Now, on Friday Jobber, we talked about some of the quote-unquote leading candidates for 2020. A waste of time. Hillary Clinton was in the mix there. Elizabeth Warren was in the mix. Our own Bernie Sanders was in the mix. And Beto O'Rourke was in the mix. And then they had some candidates that were a waste of time. They're like Terry McCullough and characters of that nature. The Democrats and the Republicans, the Republican field, what happened to the Republicans in 2015, that they had all these candidates, Uncle Carl called quote-unquote quality candidates. They were not quality candidates. They all fell like little dominoes or $2 suitcases in the rain, as LBJ would say. And that was the end of those characters there, and DJ Trump came out on top. This is one of the problems with the long electoral cycle. The corporate media has gotten people accustomed now to looking at 2020. Why? Because that spurs interest with some sectors as just a horse race, sort of like a baseball game, a football game, a soccer game is sort of an entertainment, a circus. And this whole thing to Iowa. They should have a national primary to eliminate all of those, where candidates go to Iowa and go around the cornfields, look at the hogs, etc., and then go on to New Hampshire and the rest of the states that really matter. Those are small states that honestly have very little impact there. Now, DJ Trump in New Hampshire did not come out on top, but he came out a winner in the presidential race. Whereas the Hillary Clinton, let me think in New Hampshire, who won that? I believe Hillary Clinton won New Hampshire. But the Democrats had such an archaic situation in New York where Bernie Sanders could have won it. He did not. And in California, the basic party organization. This is the reason that people start so early. But a campaigner like Beto O'Rourke is tailor-made for Iowa and also New Hampshire, because he has charisma like John F. Kennedy. Some of these other characters do not. People like Twitter King Booker, the former mayor of the urban ghetto of Newark, resonates with some in the party, traditional liberals, but traditional liberals are pretty much laying low these days. So his candidacy, we don't see it as going very far. Elizabeth Warren, yes, she's there, but she's drawing from some of the same people as Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders still has a mantle, because he had a better outcome this year. Bernie's candidates won in places that were not they expected to win. And for instance, in Minnesota, with Keith Ellison, that Bernie went to Minnesota, endorsed Keith Ellison. He was running for Attorney General there in Minnesota. And if you looked at some of the commercials on the internet and others, that you would have thought that the minister from Chicago, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, was actually running for Attorney General of Minnesota. His picture was there more than Keith Ellison. And then for icing on the cake, they brought in Sarah Jane Olsen. We don't know where she is. She was with the Simonese Liberation Army, but that was 1970s stuff. So when you dig back that far to run your dirty campaign, didn't resonate there. Plus they had a far-right crazy candidate running against Ellison, so Ellison will be moving into the Attorney General seat there in Minnesota. So again, that gives Bernie some power, and at the same time Elizabeth Warren is running around trying to find her Aboriginal and Native American ancestry. And that's a little side issue. It's more of a distraction than anything else. She should go to the very red state of Oklahoma, where Jerry Pippen presided for many, many years in politics, and hold a news conference and or actually a round table discussion there on what it means to be an Aboriginal or Native American. And that way she'd flush out some of her problems. Only a situation here from us as to where to go. Now in Washington State, a proverbial type Dino Rossi been around. He's ran for governor. He's ran for everything. And nonetheless, in the 8th district there, Republican district, he lost to Kim Snyder, I suppose. I have a little problem with my sinus this morning. Forgive me there. Be the first Democrat to represent the 8th district of Washington. I guess a traditional Republican district there. She Snyder, I think that's how to pronounce that, had 4,000 volunteers, made calls, and 53% after a new voter tally from King and Pierce County. Pierce County, if I recall correctly, is over in Tacoma. The race was called by King TV, a big Seattle station, and that was the end of that. A record number of women coming out. The 8th district hasn't sent a Democrat to Congress, but was immediately seized upon by a pickup opportunity following the retirement announcement by the Representative Rachel. He was from Auburn. So there's a Republican area down there. Incidentally, we were reading this from the Seattle Times, and we'll just quickly look at the headlines in the Seattle Times while we're here. Period. To see what is coming here. This is how a booming King County helped Kim. Maybe that's pronounced Sure. Anyway, flip the 8th for Democrats, changing demographics, and we'll be talking more about this. May have played a role in the defeat of the Dino Rossi. Well, Dino Rossi's problem is he's run for too many things. He ran for governor. He's been just running around, period, and he lost a number of races. And one of the underlying things besides demographics, just see him as a potential chronic loser. So that in itself does mean quite a bit. Let me just switch things here and go to, where are we going here? We'll go to the 35.8 here, 538.8. This is Nate Silver's shop. The 2018 map looks a lot like 2012. They got me thinking about 212. This is written actually by Nate Silver on the 8th of November. The Democrats having won the House, but not the Senate on Tuesday, with DJ Trump still in the White House. We had for 2 years of divided government. Well, that's not unusual. They've had divided government around for a very long time. But it doesn't mean pretty much every political battle is going to be pitched with eyes towards 2020. 2020 will be a unique year in that the House, Senate, and presidency are all potentially in play, and how the presidency goes and everybody's guess. But Trump took advantage of the Electoral College last time around, tipping states like Wisconsin with about 1 percentage point. He lost the popular vote by 2%. That doesn't really matter. The thing is, though, the Electoral College advantage is historically pretty immensurate. Relatively subtle changes in political conditions that may make the Electoral College go from being helping you to hurting you. In 2008, 2012, for example, the Electoral College worked to Democrats' benefit, as Barack Obama would likely have won it in the event of a popular vote tie. So here's some of slightly scary news from Trump. The 2018 map looks more like 2012 than 2016, with Democrats performing quite well in Wisconsin. We talked about that, Michigan and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania being a command and control state. As a fun day after election experiment, I decided to add up the total popular vote for the House in in every state based on ABC News tally of voters as of Wednesday night. This isn't a perfect exercise, no doubt about that, because what he was using. I made one adjustment for slightly different problem, which is that Florida doesn't bother to count voters in uncontested races. With those caveats set aside, here's a map came up with counting the popular vote. It ought to be look for me. In fact, it's the same exact map which Barack Obama defeated Willard Romney in 2012, except with Ohio going to the Republicans, as it has equal to 314 electoral votes for the Democrats, 224 for the Republicans. States shaded in light blue were won by Democrats, but fewer than 3 percentage points. But solid blue states instead, Democrats won the popular vote in Michigan by 7 percentage points, in Wisconsin by 8, Pennsylvania by 10, Minnesota by 11, and other parts of the country they won Nevada and Colorado by 6 points, New Hampshire by 12, Virginia by 15. Virginia is a key. New Mexico by 19. The pink states where Republicans won fewer than 5% were also interesting, mostly because they included Texas, where Democrats lost the popular vote for the House by 3.6%. That's very good. Vito O'Rourke, 2.6 there attempts. It's not as though Texas is exactly tipping a point yet, but Texas will be in the future, as our friend Paula Laxell, Paula down there, has talked about that Texas was moving. We were discussing the race several years ago, a Wendy's race there in Texas. Now, in Arizona, was the best one for the Democrats on Tuesday. They currently trail the popular vote for the House by 1.7 points and make up future ground as a lot of ballots from Maricopa County. We talked about that in our introductory remarks. But all of this is a bit tautological, yet, of course, the map looks good for you when you have a good night. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you'll have a good night. Going out to West Coast mail ballot states, California, Oregon, and Washington. On the other hand, the Democrats' margin is a bit inflated because of Republicans let quite a few districts go uncontested. Well, in California, they were just trying to get what they could get. This is certainly not a great map for Democrats, but it's not a bad one either. There's usually a mistake comparing these. Now, it's not a mistake in terms of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Political malpractice and the candidate, and you put in voter suppression, were some of the big problems that the Democrats face. A lot of progressives, of course, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, voted green, as we did. And a lot of people just simply did not vote, but normally vote. I'm not talking about the 45%, but usually don't vote, period. And there were some people that had not voted, voted for DJ Trump. A lot of Obama followers that voted for President Obama 2 times voted for DJ Trump, period. So one of the situations, losing all 3, even Florida wouldn't be enough. They have to win Florida plus at least North Carolina, Arizona, Texas, or Georgia as part of what you might call a Sun Belt strategy. Well, one of these, and that was where Beto O'Rourke would fit in. Beto O'Rourke could win Arizona. He would more than likely win Texas, and he'd be very competitive in Georgia. Georgia's been like 1% races, and this is one thing to remember. In some of these states, 1% race. Florida, he could win Florida because he has a type of charisma. Getting stuck in between the Northern Path and the Sun Belt Path, well, that doesn't have to be stuck there. if you win Florida or if you win Texas, I think Beto O'Rourke would win Texas. That would solve the problem. So this is why we went to this particular situation here. And I'm not sure. Oh, no, we get that. Anyway, this is some of the things that we are talking about here. Let's see if we can go to the LA Times. Denham falls behind Democrats as 3 other Republicans lose ground. This is on Friday from the Los Angeles Times. Jeff Denham lost his lead over Josh Harder on Friday, one of California's 4 unresolved congressional districts. Now, Rockenbacher of Costa Mesa fell further behind Harley Roeder, who is now roughly 7,300 votes ahead. We had targeted him to lose anyway. In Minnewater, another Republican that's down in Orange County, has seen her election night lead of 6,000 votes drop to 2020. That is Cape Porter. Tabulations are also alarming for Republican candidates. This is Young Kim in Fullerton, whose night led over Gil Sierros, has shrunk to 2,062 votes. If historical patterns hold up and Republicans lose all 4 of these, more than 50,000 voters have yet to be counted in each contest. Analysts of both parties estimate the tallies always through Democrats. Republicans now hold just 14 of 53 seats in California. Now, California was a state when Ronald Reagan himself came out of and had his base there, and it was worth 8 years of tyranny in the U.S. Steve Knight of Palmdale was ousted by Katie Hill. That was in 25. 49. Let's see who is this. The outskirts of Los Angeles. Congressional District 49 alone. The southern coast of Orange and northern San Diego counties. Democrat Mike Levin, environmental attorney, won in the state. This is where Daryl Carolyn ISIS used to be. He's no longer there. And these are some of the governor's race also in California, of course, won by the Democrat there. There was no contest. Cox faded early in the situation. While I'm here, very, very quickly, 9 are dead, 6,700 structures lost. This is in Butte County, one fire, one of California's worst. We had not been reporting on the wildfires in the state of California, but very devastating wildfires there, and it has to do with climate change, no doubt about that. Michelle Obama has a new book out. We'll talk more about that on the Monday Morning Quarterback. Now, this is an interesting story here. This will be our last one. We'll go to sports. This is divisions between the progressives and moderates threaten to complicate the new House. House Democrats have figured out how to win in districts that nearly supported DJ Trump. Now they have to forge, as they say, to govern themselves. One of the key issues facing Democrats, they prepare to take control of the House for the first time in 8 years. Strike a balance between progressive voters who are anxious to see the Democrats stand up to Trump. Well, they can stand up to Trump, but the best way to stand up to Trump is to legislate. Both constituencies will be pivotal to shaping the party's identity for 2020, no doubt about that. Moderates and progressive, this is a problem here when you put it up, moderates and progressive. There are very few moderates left around. Henry Collar from Texas, a moderate, has been in office since 2005. As many other moderate Democrats, of course, have lost their races and have disappeared to the trash can of history. If you don't respond to electoral wins we won't have a good 2020. That's from Representative Pocan. Mark Pocan is a Democrat from Wisconsin. I'm not familiar with him at all. The caucus is pushing across access to health care for all. That's a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Trump will go with it. The House Freedom Caucus, which includes many of the Tea Party type legislatures, became a powerful bloc that defined much of the agenda driving John Boehner from office. The Freedom Caucus lawmakers insisted last year that the House bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act include provisions that would largely eliminate protection for pre-existing conditions. Democratic leaders, including Nancy Pelosi, she's out of San Francisco, is hoping to overcome rank and file grumbling to retain the gavel as a speaker. Her deputy, Steny Hoyer of Maryland, has downplayed calls for a Trump impeachment. Well, that's kind of a waste of time at this time in office, but Steny Hoyer should go. But some Democrats who ran in Trump districts performed well on Election Day, too. Democrats won 19 districts that Trump carried in 2016. They hung on to 9 of their 12 incumbents running in Trump districts, and according to the Cook Report, Republicans were able to flip 3 Trump districts, seats that Trump won, that previously held by Democrats, including 2 in Minnesota, 1 in Pennsylvania. Those are marginal districts. The one in Minnesota, I believe Minnesota 8th, and the Republicans had it before. It's kind of been back and forth the last 10 years in the South. That was the district that the governor-elect Waltz of Minnesota occupied, and his re-election was very tenuous at best. I don't believe that Congress exercising oversight role and ability to work with the president is mutually exclusive. That is from Stephanie Murphy. She's out of Florida. Let me finish this up. House Democrats' identity could be very well shaped by the fact that the majority will be made up of legislative neophytes. Most of the incoming lawmakers are first-time politicians. Now, that's totally a different situation there. New ones are coming in, and also new policies being shaped. That is one of the things that we'll be cognizant of. Let me just catch the fire a little bit here, and we'll go to the sports. Sorry about that, but we can't let this go by. Of 67,000 structures, one of the reach my free articles here, but anyway, none of the structures here. They always want you to subscribe. We subscribe to every newspaper. We'd been out of the game long time ago. It'd be utterly impossible to get as many newspapers as we use. Anyway, we'll have to get that story later. Let's do the sports here. Nonetheless, the NBA, we'll do the NBA here, and we'll do national college football. We don't have scores as far as I know now. That will have to be on the Monday morning quarterback. And I'm running a little fast here to get to the bottom of the page. There were some games on a Friday night. I'll try to get those to you. Wake Forest and North Carolina State. That was actually on Thursday night. Wake Forest 27-23, Louisville and Syracuse. Syracuse 54-23 for Louisville, and Fresno State and Boise State. Always an interesting matchup there, 24-17 there. And that's all we have there. The NBA scores from last night. The Wizards were at the Magic, and the Magic evidently had the Magic 117-108 over the Wizards. And in an overtime game, the Hornets win Philly. The 76ers 133-132. The Pistons were in Atlanta. The Pistons 124-107. The Pacers were at the Heat, and the Pacers beat the Heat 110-102. The Nets of Jersey were at the Nuggets in Denver. A 2-pointer there. The Nuggets 112-110. The Celtics were in Utah. The Jazz 123-115. And finally, the T-Wolves were at the Kings, and of course got beat as usual. 121 for the Kings, 110 for the T-Wolves. And on to the NHL. And get those scores in here, we hope. The Devils and the Maple Leafs 6-1 there. The Blue Jackets and Capitals. Blue Jackets.
This is actually
2-1.
under your budget.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you move in, Geico could help you save on rent, isn't it?
And we have to get rid of that. Anyway, the Rangers and Red Wings in the Motor City. Finally, it was overtime. The Red Wings are 3-2 over the Rangers. The Sharks and Blues in St. Louis. The Blues shut out the Sharks. The Avalanche and Jets. Let's see, it was the Jets 6-2. And finally, the Wild and the Anaheim Ducks. I like that name. The Wild 5. Was that? Wait a minute here. Yeah, 5-1. And that does it for the National Hockey League. That will do it for us. On our flip side, we have a Numbers Man production. That's our macroeconomics program coming up this weekend. And also an open source report. We'll finally get that out. All of those things. Nonetheless, old Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth here. A good weekend to all. And it was quite a week. We'll have on the Monday Morning Quarterback the latest. And happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans.